Okay then, so it looks like the attendees are arriving. So I think we'll start. Welcome everyone. So I think this is the third Umbraco Community Hours. And the topic today is .NET Core and Umbraco's transition to .NET Core and version 9 of the new CMS. We've quite a few panelists today, all members or former members of the Unicore team, which is the team that's been working in Umbraco to transition the product to .NET Core. I've just got a couple of practical points to start with. I'm going to be juggling quite a few things, so I probably won't be monitoring the chat, but there is a Q&A. So if anyone's got questions to ask that they haven't put in before, or any follow-ups on things we discussed, please feel free to ask them in there, and I'll try and relay them to the panel. And also you can raise your hand. So if you want to do that and come off mute to ask a question, please feel free to do that as well. But to start, we'll just do some quick introductions. I suspect most people know most people, but just in case, we'll go quickly around the team so you can hear who we've got here today. So I'll start from my top left, and maybe you can pass on to people. So I've got Steve. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Steve Temple. I'm a long-time Umbraco user since 4-point-something and live in Bristol, UK. I'll pass on to Emma.
Hiya, yeah, very similar to Steve, live in Bristol, worked with Umbraco since one of the version 4s, and just keep coming back to it. Okay, I'll pass over to Simone.
Hi everyone, I'm Simone. I'm an Italian living in Belgium. I'm a long-time user of Umbraco as well, and happy to be part of this transition to .NET Core team. And I think the last is Benjamin.
Hi, Benjamin Karleski. I'm from the United States, living in Oregon, and been working with Umbraco kind of off and on for 6 years and more heavily in the past 2. And I'll pass over to Bjarke.
Yeah, my name is Bjarke, and I'm from Umbraco HQ. I'm the steward of the team and also the lead of the Migrating project.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we've had quite a few questions come through on the sheets. I've gathered them all together and tried to group them into areas that I think make sense to discuss together. So I've got about 5 or 6 different topics to cover, so I think we'll get started. The first thing I wanted to ask people about, one thing I'm very conscious about as Umbraco developers is we're very used to working with .NET Framework, and we're possibly a little behind the .NET developer ecosystem as a whole, in the sense that we've spent most of our time working on Umbraco and therefore .NET Framework. So putting Umbraco itself to one side at the minute, maybe we could talk a bit about what differences developers will find working with .NET Core, and also what similarities, to hopefully sort of reassure people that it's not so different. I think, Simone, since you're on screen, I don't know if you maybe wanted to start with that, because I know you worked with .NET Core for quite some time. What do you find that the biggest differences are, and what are the things you find similar?
Let's start with the thing that we find similar. It's still .NET. So most of the API are, probably 100% of the API that you had in .NET Framework are available in .NET Core 5, or already from the 3, it was already available. Now we should, just a small housekeeping thing, we should stop calling .NET Core, because from what has been released in November, it's called .NET 5, because .NET Framework doesn't exist anymore. So there is just one thing which is called .NET, which is based on .NET Core, but it's .NET. So that's the only .NET that exists from now on. So all the API are the same. The main difference is that it's completely open source, as opposed to .NET Framework, which had only some few maybe libraries as open source. Is cross-platform, so it runs on Windows, on Linux, on Mac, on Raspberry Pi, on wherever you want it to run. It's lightweight. It's optimized for running on the cloud and high density environment, because the footprint is very small, and it's a kind of get more like a menu thing, rather than a huge buffet like before. So before with .NET Framework, you were getting I don't know, 100 megabyte framework of DLL that you had to include in every project. And now if you are building a console application, you only get the system DLL and the basic DLLs, and then you don't have to bring over maybe some weird stuff like remoting or a thing that you are not going to use. That's has a huge advantage for the cloud environment, because you just bring whatever you want, and it's normal web project that only rely on the ASP.NET MVC, or they are less than 20 megabyte of DLLs compared to maybe 100 of before. And looking at the web framework part, it's the main thing that they've done is that they put together all the framework into one model. While before you had the Signalar, Web API, MVC, Web Form, Razor API, Razor Pages, whatever they had. Everything, they had different, they had similar concept but treated differently. While now everything it's the same. If you have the dependency injection, you configure it once, and it works for everything. If you have configuration, it works it's done once, and it's configured for all the thing you might have in your project. So it's a big redesign and reorganization of everything. And in general, it became more lightweight than before, and more modern looking library and API, let's say.
Sounds good, thanks. I'll just maybe ask some other members of the panel. I mean, I know Simone had worked with .NET Core for some time, Bjarke has as well. I was quite new to it when I joined the Unicore team. I don't know whether Benjamin, Emma, or Steve, you were in a similar situation. If you can remember what it was you found difficult to start with, and what things you found actually transferred quite easily from your previous experience. I don't know who wants to try and answer that.
Yeah, I mean, because I've been working a lot in the Umbraco world, and it was .NET Framework, I think unless you did a different project, naturally you're kind of in that world, and .NET Core might be quite new to you. So getting initially spun up, that first running the project and just getting used to doing things like that, not having the usual way of setting up my projects, was at first I was a bit slow to get started. I think when I came to the physical meetup, I had a problem. It was because I had a custom PowerShell script that was messing up my build, basically. But it made me feel like everything was really tricky. But actually, once Bjarke helped me sort that, I started more and more finding it much more lightweight and easy to run. I think, so I did the article about config, demystifying config in 24 days in Umbraco, and shifting to that sort of the app settings JSON and using the configuration providers. I just find that a lot more natural now, especially because we've always tried to use, we always use like dependency injection anyway, but it's always been a bit more hassle to get set up and started in .NET Framework, and now it's all just built for those purposes, making it more testable as well. So I think once I understood say like you have a blocker that stops you starting out, and then you understand what's actually happening, it wasn't because of .NET Core, it was just my environment, then it wasn't as scary anymore.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
That's quite familiar. But when you first start off, you hit a blocker, you don't know if it's just something silly you're going to get over in 5 minutes, or whether it's something fundamental.
Yeah, exactly. So just sort of push through, and you'll probably find that someone has gone through exactly the same thing. It's really good seeing the blogs coming out about people's experiences shifting to .NET Core and trying out that. So yeah, just keep pushing through. But overall now I just prefer working with .NET Core now.
Yeah, that's good. So you're still calling it .NET Core, and I'm going to do that hundreds of times.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sorry about that in advance.
.NET 5.
Just .NET. Anyway, so let's move on to Umbraco then. So I guess it's a similar question, really. You want to understand what's different, what are we going to need to learn or relearn, but also on the kind of more reassuring side, what's not changing. So we had a question about, will the back office be changing from Angularjs, which I think the long-term answer is we probably all hope so, but as part of this .NET Core project, Bjarke, it's not changing, is it?
No, it will be 99% identical. We have changed a few APIs to align the APIs. Basically, in V8, sometimes enums are serialized as integers, and sometimes they're serialized as strings. We have aligned that, so it's now always serialized as strings, and a few changes to members because of the migration from membership providers to ASP.NET Core identity. But overall, all the client code is more or less the same.
Okay. And what else should be very familiar from Umbraco users of V8 when they come to V9?
I'm tempted to say the Umbraco, because everything is still Umbraco. You still need to have a render controller, and we still have all the extension methods and models builder. All the concepts are the same. It's just a technology update. Yeah. And in my opinion, the difference in .NET or .NET Core and .NET Framework is not that big. The biggest changes are in the web framework, which is still called ASP.NET Core.
Okay.
Because it was a complete rewrite of the web framework. And I like the fact that .NET 5 and .NET Core is less magic. All executables have a main method, and as we know from other programming languages, so it's easy to find the starting point of the application. I also like the fact that CLI is a first citizen. I think that will be a good benefit to front-end developers that are used to use CLI for NPM and stuff like that.
Okay. Benjamin, I think you wanted to come in, and you've done a bit of work already on package migration, haven't you? So maybe you talk about the things you found that are different and similar.
I think there's a lot that's similar, and I think Bjarke had said that the things that I really found kind of took some getting used to was, as Emma mentioned, the config was a big one. It's just a whole different way of dealing with config and managing your config, and so getting your mind around that. Once you get your mind around that, yeah, I do find it easier to work with, but it does take a mental shift. And then there is changes in how you can initialize things, because we are now using the standard .NET Core dependency injection. You can use, your startup class to actually put in your components and build your components using the standard .NET methodologies, as well as, I believe you mentioned in your article, composers and components are still there as well. So you kind of have both ways you can do that. There was one other thing I was remembering, but it's gone to me now. But there is a lot more that's the same, I found, than different, and so it is a very similar experience. Oh, the difference between the web route and the content route. Yeah. Having those as two separate things and two separate concepts, just something you kind of have to get your head around to figure out what should go where and what you want there.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things I've noticed over the course of the development is how we've moved certain things over from what you might have called the Umbraco way in V8 more to the .NET way. So things like config and things like the pipeline that you were talking about. I wanted to ask Bjarke, we had a question about from Robert Foster about events. So it appears that subscribing to events has changed in Unicore. Can you describe how to use the new system? So I think this is one of these things where we've more aligned with, I guess, .NET standards rather than the way Umbraco did things in the past. Could you talk a little bit about that and what we might expect as developers working with us?
Yeah, basically we aim for changing all the static events into a new pattern, which is heavily inspired by mediators notifications. And the benefits are, it is way better for dependency injections. So with the static events, it was not a super good architectural solution because we had interfaces like the iContent service, but all the events was on the content service, so it needed to be public. And if you implemented another implementation of iContent service, you couldn't publish these or raise these events. So yeah, but now it's all handled by dependency injection. So you just need to register an handler for a specific event in the container, and then it will be picked up when the notification is published.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we had another question from Jean Sorrel. I think John or Jean, I'm not sure, but it says, can you give us an overview of what changes will be needed to move to .NET Core version in terms of custom code, template, macros, etc.? I think you've answered that a little bit. I mean, I know Steve is here. I think he's off video at the minute, but he's done a little bit of work migrating a website from .NET Framework to, sorry, Umbraco 8 to Umbraco 9. I don't know whether you could answer that at all, Steve, about the things you found you had to change moving from V8 to V9.
I think Steve lost his panelist.
I thought he was just he had a blue screen.
Oh, shame. Okay,
yeah.
Never mind. All right, well, unless anyone else has got anything more to discuss on that topic, we're just thinking of developers moving from V8 to V9.
In general, you will need to update all the namespaces and inject your dependencies everywhere. So we have changed a couple of static classes like the IO helper into an instant class and an interface. So now you will inject the IO helper. And same for Umbraco context. If you use that, now you will inject an Umbraco context accessor because the Umbraco context is scoped and we have an accessor if you need it in a singleton. And basically we have all our services as singletons.
Okay. Yeah. Could you also talk about what we've called the kind of friendly extension methods? Because I know I can see Lars is on the call. So if I talk about service locator or anything like that, I'll probably get some messages in the chat. But one of the things about the service locator is in some ways it's slightly friendlier when you're working in the views, is you haven't got to think about all the services you need to inject into your methods for rendering the value of a content item, for example. So we've done some things to allow you to do that in a more friendly way. Could you just explain what we've done there?
Yeah, basically the published content is both a service and a model. So when you can call all these traversal extensions, it is basically calling other services, but we can't inject these into the model. So we are using an internal service locator to pick them up from the container. And these extension methods basically just call another extension method where you can inject everything. So if you want your views to be fully testable, you can still use the extension method that injects the dependencies.
Yeah, perfect. And if you want to, as we said, you can still inject service. Well, you can inject services into views now in .NET Core or in .NET, exactly. And so you could use that if you wanted to as well. Okay. So so the next topic I wanted to talk about was package development, and obviously developing custom solutions, custom websites are in some ways similar to package development. But there may be some specific issues for package developers to be aware of. And one I ran into when I was trying to do this work was the kind of the distribution. I think somebody mentioned around the kind of difference of the www route and the content route and getting the files into there. So we've got some templates to help with that. Can I come to you, Bjarke? Maybe you can just explain a bit about that.
Yeah, so basically this is due to the new CS project format called SDK formats. So now NuGet don't support content the way we used content or static files. So we have made a package template that uses MS build targets to copy the content from the NuGet package into the solution. So you have the same experience as before.
Okay, so you'd recommend for somebody building a package on version 9 to start off with this template, and that'll give them those.
I would recommend that, or at least look into it, because it's fairly simple what we are doing, but you need to handle this part that NuGet don't support content in the way it used to do.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, if we've got anything more to add, because I saw recently Matt's article in Script covering the topic of supporting V8 and V9, and I'm not sure we have too much to add that he hasn't put in there, but just in case we do, I mean, I'll just say in terms of how we're doing the HQ packages, our plan there is really to have one repo but 2 branches. So we aren't attempting to multi-target V8 and V9. But I mean, I guess, Bjarke, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on feasibility of doing multi-targeting between V8.
No, I think it,
on their standard and how that works across.
I think it will be case by case, but the more front or the more client code you have, the easier it will most likely be to migrate, or the less backend code you have. So if you have a package that is completely client code, it makes sense to just multi-target it. But if you have a lot of backend code, of course, I would recommend to move as much of your code into a net standard class library that can be reused, and then abstract your dependencies to Umbraco, and then implement these for each version of Umbraco. Yeah, as you say, Umbraco at the HQ packages, we won't multi-target. We will have different branches.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, Benjamin, are you still there? Because if so, I think, as I say, I think you've been working on some package migration. If you've got anything to add or advice on how you're planning to manage supporting V8 and V9?
I think both Steve and Benjamin has dropped out, and they're not panelists anymore. I don't know if you can re-add them as panelists because
they're attendees. Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay. Okay, Steve, you're allowed to talk. And yeah, Benjamin, you're allowed to talk as well now. If anyone else wants to talk, please feel free to raise your hand too, but I was specifically hoping these two would be able to contribute. Are you there, Benjamin? Did you hear the question?
Yeah, no.
Packages.
Can you, I mean, what's the specific question you wanted me to?
I just know that you've done a bit of work or started a bit of work on a package migration yourself, and I was wondering how you were planning to handle, or if you're planning to handle, supporting V8 and V9.
I think that the only package I'm helping maintain that would probably need to address that is the GraphQL package, and I think we will probably have separate.
Oh, this seems to have lost Benjamin again. That was possibly me. There's a button here to promote him to panelists, which I've now done, but
Yes, I think it dropped me off and
sorry about
brought
that.
me back in. No,
remember
that's
to not do
okay.
that when you're talking, but keep carrying on.
I was just saying that I think the plan for the GraphQL package, we're going to have 2 different branches that we'll maintain. It'll be part of the same project, but we are not going to multi-target, I think. Matt's article in Script, I think, did an excellent job of kind of highlighting the differences and the advantages to each approach. And for us, it really just made sense to have different branches and not try and multi-target there.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thanks. So I'm going to move on to another topic. These are all related, obviously. And this is one on sort of support and documentation. So we've had questions about what documentation is available. Will there be tutorials on getting started with Umbraco? That was from Simon. Someone asked the question, will there be a more complete guide to code changes needed between V8 and V9? So Bjarke, maybe you could start by saying what we're doing at HQ with regards to documentation and support.
Yeah, currently we are looking into the documentation on our and migrating that so all code examples are up to date, and yeah. And then we have Kevin Jump has an excellent repository right now with his findings. I guess we will borrow a lot of that when we are closer to the final release. But right now, I think everyone should just look at that repository to find some of the changes. Regarding tutorials, I'm not sure what or how the format for these tutorials should be. In general, it's a bit hard to to know at what level we should help people, because Microsoft has a lot of excellent documentation, and I think most Umbraco developers will have challenges regarding the changes in ASP.NET to ASP.NET Core. So basically the web framework and not the Umbraco parts. So I guess we will try to have a list of recommended Microsoft documentation to read, and then of course reach out if you can describe how you need documentation. Then we will look into how we can produce it. But I'm afraid some also feel this is such a new topic that they don't even know what to ask.
Yeah, there's a mix of things, isn't there? So, I mean, with .NET Framework to .NET 5, .NET Core, there's no point really Umbraco producing documentation for that, because lots of developers have gone through that, and Microsoft Docs are very good.
Yeah.
I think we're also at a stage where a lot of people are experimenting to an extent. So there are things appearing in blogs and community member repos, as you say. But yeah, we have this new documentation repository for HQ for Umbraco. And the aim will be obviously to make sure that stuff is collated and curated into there, such that that'll be available moving forward. But I think it is inevitable that at the moment things are a little bit scattered, and things are in different places where different people are working on things. Yeah,
you also have yourself. You have a blog with a good series of your findings and your thoughts when you migrated. Yeah. That is also a good source. Yeah, I mean, I'll make sure these things we're talking about are linked on the YouTube video when this goes up on there.
Yeah, and also Sophie from Documentation Curators and that team, we have been working closely with them with meetings and things to make sure we're talking about this, and the link Warren just posted to the work in progress docs, we're feeding into those, and but yeah, if people let us know if there's missing areas when we're sort of closer, I think that would be really useful.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is a topic of third-party dependencies. So clearly Umbraco depends on various other frameworks and libraries, and some of those things have changed moving into .NET Core. So we had a specific question around how images will be handled. Will image processor be used, or will it be replaced?
Yeah.
You go to Bjarke again, but I just wonder if anyone else wants to jump in, please do.
Yeah, so basically, image processor is a stored project that is not compatible with .NET Standard and thereby not .NET 5. So we have replaced image processor with image sharp, but we also introduced some abstractions. So in theory, you can replace the image processing. So the way image processor and image sharp worked was basically just listening on some endpoints and then manipulating the images. It should, in theory, be fairly simple to implement that yourself and use another library like, image, whatever they're called. I think Google have one. But as far as I know, image sharp is the best one on the market currently. But it's still a relatively new project. So some of the edge cases is not supported that image processors supported, but it is still an open source project. So I recommend everyone to help on that product and implement potential missing features. Yeah. And are there any other libraries or dependencies we've changed? Yeah. So we have some nested dependencies. Examine are using Lucene.NET, and we will need to update that to the latest version, 4.5, I guess it's called, which is currently in beta. But that version is .NET Standard compatible. And then client dependency is replaced by Smidge, which is also one of Shannon's projects, which is basically built with Umbraco in mind. And then light inject is removed because dependency injection is native in the new ASP.NET Core web framework. So we completely rely on that And Microsoft's abstractions allows you to replace the underlying framework if you want to.
Okay, so we're currently still using light injects, but it's just we're not using them at all.
Nope.
Okay.
We're just using the internal.
Okay, I see.
Native.
If somebody wanted to use that or another DI container, they could do
Exactly. We are not using any complex features anyway. So.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to pick up a few questions that have come in. So let me just run through these. So Matt Brailsford's asking, in the HQ packages, will you actively be supporting V8? Will you be implementing features between two branches? And if so, can you demonstrate the cherry picking approach? So I can answer the first part is, I mean, yes, we will still be supported V8. We suspect that in time, and it's probably not completely defined what time that will be, but there will be a final minor of CMS and forms and other HQ packages, at which point we won't look to add new features to that, and we will be adding new features to V9. But for a period of time, certainly changes will be made to both projects. And the way it's done really is hopefully not too painful, but pull requests and merges. So I mean, Bjarke, you've been doing this for about 18 months, I think, taking the changes from V8 CMS and putting them into V9, which I know has been super painful, but it can't be worse than that, I guess is what I'm going to say. So.
Exactly. Right now, Umbraco is a moving target, so we need to do it. But as soon as V9 is the main branch, we also expect more and more PRs to be directly pointed to that branch instead of V8, and thereby the merge simpler.
Yeah. Okay. And then the previous, I'm going backwards actually, but the previous question he asked was, are there any changes to the composition API given the change in the DI container? Are the registration methods still the same, and are collection builders still supported? So my understanding of this question is we have with Umbraco and V8, we have this concept of composers and components, which is what you use to register things with a container and hook up events. But you don't have to use that in V9 because we have access to the underlying abstractions and the service pipeline. But they're not going away, are they?
No. So you can still use composers, but instead of a composition that is injected, you will have an Umbraco builder where you have access to the underlying service container from Microsoft. And that is super cool because it is best practice for all packages on NuGet to have extension methods on that interface. So you can just call, say, in our case, it's called the builder.services, and then you can call use image sharp, and then image sharp has this extension method that sets up everything. I will recommend every package developers to do the same, and in your composers just call this extension method. It makes sense to have a composer still if you want your package to be installed without any code. This is the way to do it basically, but if you want to have full freedom of the ordering things are registered, then you can do it yourself. And this is important if two packages are both replacing one of the services from Umbraco.
Right. Yeah, so in particular, if you want to support installing via the back office, it's important to have them because in those cases, you don't have the opportunity then to write code or for it to run on startup.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, and his previous question was, are the 0.1% of API changes in Angular documented somewhere? Hopefully that's...
They're not. I think it's only 3 pretty simple pull requests, so we can find these again. But if I recall correctly, most of the pain was in the install process, and I don't expect any package developers to extend or use these APIs.
Okay. I've got one question from Warren, but I'll save that to the end because I think it's quite a good one to end up with. I'm going to move on to the $1 million question now, I think, which came from Minhee Myung, and he said, does that mean, should I migrate our Umbraco website to .NET Core? So to unpack that a little bit, I think the question would be, when are we saying people should be starting new projects on .NET Core, and when and should people migrate from V8 to V9? I guess let me start with not Bjarke. I'll talk to some people who are working at agencies and are likely have to make this decision, or working on projects. So Emma, do you want to talk? Have you considered this with Rock Solid Digital at all yet, when you start new projects on V9?
Yeah, we've sort of talked about it. I'm pretty risk averse anyway, but I know I kind of feel like by the time we get to launch, I'll be comfortable to start a new project on it. In terms of a migration, again, I'd probably just wait a couple of weeks after launch, and I'm quite confident because obviously I'm comfortable with seeing the code base and everything that's gone through. But if I wasn't on the team, you normally just wait a few weeks after a brand new launch, don't you, to install anything? So depending how you could start development, but yeah, you'll probably be upgrading patches throughout the development, and that's usual as well. When you start a build on Umbraco, quite often you'll have patches come in and that kind of thing. So I don't know, my gut feel would be I'd start it internally probably just before launch, depending how long the project was going to run on for. If it was a huge build, then you probably want to start a bit early, feeling comfortable. But yeah, I wouldn't have any real qualms. Everything.
Yeah, it's very project specific, isn't it? Whether you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you work, if you know it's going to have a long run and long development lead time, then it makes sense to get on quick.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in terms of migrations, obviously moving from V8 to V9, then there'll need to be a reason to do that, because V8 isn't going away anytime soon, and it's still going to be supported. It's still going to have at least 1 or 2 more minors, bug fixes supported, sometimes security fixes for even longer. But the process of migrating from V8 to V9, maybe I'll come back to you, Bjarke. How do you see that working? And then do you see that as a complicated thing for developers to do, or should that be a fairly straightforward process?
Again, it depends. So basically, if you have a lot of custom code, then you will need to update all this custom code, new namespaces, inject your dependencies and so on. But on fairly simple projects, I think it's pretty straightforward. I have a super simple website that are only using, the HQ packages like forms. And I only expect me to have to update the namespaces in the views to have that project migrated. So basically the changes to the database are very small, comparable to between minor versions in V8. We don't have a big content migration as we had in V7 to V8. So in theory, or basically I can just copy the database and use that, and then the migration will update it to the current state, and then I will have to revisit my custom code. But in these projects, or this project is only in views. So
yeah, okay. Steve or Benjamin, or Simone, actually, on your projects, are you considering being early adopters on the new version, or is there anything you're waiting for before you'd want to make the jump?
In our case, we have a series of sites that we create every 6 months. So the project is going live in June. It's still on V8, but the one that is going to go live in January 2022, it's probably going to be on V9. We still haven't looked at it yet a lot, apart from myself looking at the code and contributing to the project here. But the idea would be to indeed to start. It's a new project, pretty simple. So as we said before, it depends on your project type. So we will sure go for V9, because also we have some. Well, maybe it's something that we can discuss later when the topics come. But for us, it's very important that it can run on not only on Windows.
It's perfect. That's my next question.
So it's good that I mean, we are really like the thing that we are waiting the most is to be able to run on Linux or on containers, and that's and that brings a huge cost saving also, because we run on the cloud, and so it's the cost. It's I mean, on Azure, for example, the cost of running a app service on a Linux, it's half than running on Windows. So it's still not a huge saving because we're not using huge SKUs, but still, if you can save €200 a month, it's over a year. It's still kind of, if the budget of this site is pretty small, it's still a lot of saving at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, well, as I said, that was the next question I had. I mean, it came from Simon. He said, does that mean Umbraco can now be run on Linux? I guess the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. I mean, I think I'm probably Bjarke is the best person to answer what Umbraco will officially support, but I think that Umbraco HQ will support mostly running on Windows, and Linux will be mostly a community-based effort. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but in theory, we did some PRs with the .NET Core version of Umbraco V9 has some integration testing running already on Linux. So it's fairly compatible. I mean, so in theory, it could run. But as your mileage may vary approach in this case.
Yeah, exactly. So from HQ, our main focus is on Windows. But we have set up, as Simone says, integrations tests are running on Linux using a Docker image with MS SQL. So we have the database, and Microsoft SQL is already cross-platform. And also we have actually added now support for our acceptance test to be run on the build server too, both on Windows and Linux. So we have a fairly good idea that stuff are working. But again, it's a joint effort between the community and us, because all packages also need to support Linux, and especially paths needs attention. So all paths has the correct casing, which is a new thing compared to Windows, where the Windows file system is case insensitive.
Is there anything else to consider? I mean, obviously .NET Core, sorry, Simone, .NET runs on Linux, but as you mentioned, file paths are case sensitive, so that's something to think about. Is there anything else that just you need to do differently or think about when you're running cross-platform?
How about the restarts?
Yeah, it's
when the
not really,
service stops. Yeah,
it's not really a cross-platform issue. It's a general issue that .NET Core or ASP.NET Core is separated from the web server. So back in the days, the web framework was tightly coupled to IIS, and you could basically recycle IIS. We can't do that anymore. And yeah, the web framework has a built-in web server called Kestrel, which Microsoft don't recommend to have as the public-facing web server. So they recommend to have some kind of reverse proxy in front, or using IIS in-process mode. So basically it can run in-process IIS. But we can, code-wise, we can only stop the application. And then you need a web server to reboot the application if it's closed, basically. But as far as I can see, it should also be possible if you use nginx as a reverse proxy on Linux.
Okay, that's great. We'll move on. I just want the cross-platform thing. I think it's going to be one of the best things. Is going to be my front-end colleagues who are using their Macs are now going to be able to run Umbraco locally, because I've been at an agency for years and we've always had to have virtual machines, and it's just caused so much pain over the years. To be able to run it natively on their Macs is going to be a massive boost, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to have to move on a little bit quicker because I've got quite a few questions to get through, but got a topic here on plans for V8 after V9. So Richard Ockerby's asked the question, do we know what's happening with Umbraco V8 and how long will we have major and minor updates? I just have to come to you, Bjarke, because this is
we are working on a plan for this. We expect a blog post explaining this later this month. So it's basically a fine balance between especially all the open community PRs that needs to be handled before we can, close it or whatever we should call it. But as you said, we expect at least 1 or 2 minors after the release of V9.
Okay. And then a couple of questions were asked for plans for further development of V9. So once we're all out the door and it's running. So Mirko asked the question, I read some time ago that database access is being abstracted, which should allow support for other databases such as MySQL or Postgres. What about that? Can we help? So yeah, Bjarke, this is something that may be on the roadmap for the future, but I don't think there's any firm plans yet. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So even that the database access is being abstracted is still a major task to implement support for other databases. And it's not a priority from HQ right now, especially because Microsoft SQL is cross-platform and is doing super well. So we have dreams of re-engineering the entire database format, but that would also be a big project with a massive migration. But it should be part of that, I guess, instead of right now. But of course, HQ will help if some kind of community initiative are started to try implementing MySQL support or PostgreSQL support. In my opinion, the hardest part is to test everything. Right now, just supporting Microsoft SQL and SQL Compact Edition is a nightmare test-wise because we can't execute our integrations test on the Compact Edition and so on.
Yeah. Okay. And then we had a question just on the kind of status of the project and what we can expect in the coming weeks. So we've had we're on Alpha 4 now, which was released a few weeks ago, which I think a lot of people have taken for a spin and started package development on. I guess betas and release candidates come next, but can you explain a little bit more about the roadmap over the next month?
Yeah, so we still aim for having the beta available by the end of this month. So that means the CMS is considered feature complete. Some of the remaining features are examine updated, members updated to use ASP.NET Core Identity, and the remaining events migrated to notifications. After that, as you say, a release candidate, hopefully around Code Garden. At that stage, we will also have the HQ packages available to forms and deploy and the starter kit. And then, yeah, a couple of months later, we plan to ship. But it all depends on how much feedback we have. The more feedback, the earlier in the process, the better.
Yeah. Well, that's my next question, actually. If I didn't know better, I think you were reading the same sheet as me. But, so the next one is, is there any areas where the community can help get involved before the launch? So we've had a lot of community involvement throughout, actually, in terms of PRs and different things. But at this particular time, what's the most useful way people can get involved?
Yeah, right now at this stage in the project, it is to test edge cases. If you did something special in V8, try it out in the alpha versions and the upcoming beta. As soon as we have a list of bugs, of course, all help on fixing these are very welcome. But otherwise, it needs to be pretty small tasks, like finding a to-do in the code base and fixing that, because otherwise we are trying to close the CMS, and then HQ focus will be on our packages, our main focus, and of course, bug fixes. But if we can keep the list of bugs, known bugs, short, then our focus will be on migrating our packages.
I think another way that the community can really help is also going to be with look for your favorite V8 packages and offer to help test them out under the V9 beta, and especially if they're open source packages, offer to help get them up to V9. Because I think one of the areas where V8 really struggled in the initial phase was having a lot of packages ready for that initial launch. And I know we're giving a much longer window here with our beta release and then the release candidate. And I know HQ has done a lot to try and focus on giving package developers both time and resources to do this transition and be prepared. But I think that's a place where the community can really step up and test your packages and you know, if they need some work, you know, work on them.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. Emma, you had something to say on this?
Yeah, another area I think I found when I was making changes for members was unit test coverage, and you just have so much more confidence if you know there's high coverage in the code base. It's something we know is obviously quite low at the moment, but I've created an open issue to say, after a talk that we had in Umbraco London with Lars and a few other people, just thinking of how we could create tasks from this. Basically looking at what the coverage is, where the really low areas are, and then it's a really good place to start if you want to get involved. You can create a unit test, understand the area you're working with, but not, maybe you'd be nervous to actually work on the code that's running the thing, but you could work on the unit tests and discover how things are put together that way. So increasing test coverage and maintaining that coverage once it's increased, I think, is really important for a solid product moving forwards.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I totally agree, but not only unit test, also integration test and acceptance test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think for some developers it's easier to get started with acceptance test because they are more often like a black box, so you can just call the service and it's available. Unlike unit tests where you need to mark all the dependencies and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So in the last 10 minutes or so, 8 minutes, I just wanted to also touch on another topic, which is about community teams in general, which is something Umbraco has done now for a while. I think it started with a documentation team, and there's been a number, I think we were the 4th or 5th one that joined for the .NET Core transition, and I think it's going to be something that we'll use in future on other topics. And so since we've got 4 or 5 members of the community teams, I wanted to just give a chance to ask them really, and the questions I've got are things in what ways have you found to contribute? Is it what you expected? How you juggle your time between your day job and the community work? And is it something you'd recommend and think people would get something out of, whether it's joining an existing team or any future ones? So maybe just quickly go around each of us and any particular things on that you fancy commenting on. Maybe start with Steve.
I think it's the wrong Steve.
Yeah, I think he's struggling today with connection.
Someone else then. Emma?
I'll carry on since I was talking. Yeah, so for me, it's kind of 2 aspects. So I was lucky really that Rock Solid Knowledge gave me time in the office as well to do this, and support from the team, especially in the identity space. So like Scott Brady and that kind of thing. I also set up weekly chats just so I didn't feel, because sometimes you can kind of feel isolated, even though we chat here. We all live in different places, and then lockdown happened. I think lockdown happened literally just after we came to meet each other in person. But yeah, I felt more supported by being able to speak to people in work, but then we're contributing gold partners, so you might not actually have that. And so I did also spend quite a lot of time outside. I tend to just try and just go with when I get that kind of flow state. I'm not one of these people who's like at 9 o'clock till 10 every Sunday I do this or something. I just, once I get into a topic, and I'll get kind of hooked into it and work on it till I finish that, and then have a bit of a break, because it is quite easy to spend too long on something and then you feel like, oh, my weekend's gone. So it's really important to keep that balance, because we work a lot of the time you're working on code every single day, looking at the computer, and by the weekend you do need to give yourself a break. But so yeah, it kind of, and then I moved house and had no Wi-Fi for a few weeks, so I haven't been as productive lately.
Hits productivity. Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say, and it's been really good learning experience. I've learned a lot more about the Umbraco code base, lots of different expertise on our community team, and really understanding how Umbraco's products been built and moving towards. So that's been really good. Definitely there'll be an element of feeling intimidated if you're in a space you haven't normally worked in, but it's just everyone wants to help you get started and resolve issues that you might have. So overall, I'd say really positive. Just maintain what you can do capacity wise, and try not to pressure yourself too much, because that's quite easy to do.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because it's a voluntary thing. If you're not enjoying it, then you've got to question why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Simone, have you got any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, actually, I'm very happy to be in this team, and unfortunately, I was not able to contribute as much because I had just a son recently, so it's a lot of time taken, and at work we are having some huge issues, so I didn't have the time to kind of contribute as much as I would have liked, but now it's getting better, and I think my main reason to join this team was to help stream and contribute to the possibility of running Umbraco on Linux, because it's a big important feature for my organization. That's also, I was not a super expert on Linux, so that's also good, because I'm also learning. Probably there are people in the community that have more experience of me, and they probably would have done better job than me, but at least it's here I also learn myself new things, like okay, I knew Docker, I knew Kubernetes, but here this way I can try to apply to some real scenario and see how Umbraco could run into this, let's say, new trendy, for me at least, but maybe for other people it's not that new and trendy, but it's still a kind of fairly new technology, and that's what I really like, and I think it's a good thing. Unfortunately, I joined in the second call when the lockdown already started, so I never had the chance to meet anybody in person, or at least not in this context. I met everybody already in previous Code Garden, but I never had the luck to meet this team in person.
Well, hopefully we'll have a chance to do that. And I think you're right, that combination of the learning and contributing is also really important, because you get a lot out of it yourself as well as what you can give in. Who else? Benjamin, any thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, I mean, to answer kind of the question about was it what I was expecting? Not really. I was kind of expecting to come in and wanting to do more actual coding on the project itself and wanting to get into the code base more. That was my original intent. But 2020 hit, and things changed, and work schedule changed, and I was not really able to do as much as I wanted to. But I was still able, I think, the ways that I found I still contribute is just being part of the team, hearing from what's going on, hearing from the various other team members about what progress we're making, what challenges we're seeing, and then being able to interface with the community and answer questions, and trying things out. I didn't have time to dig into a lot of the meatier code issues, but like playing around with it on Linux, that was a lot of fun, and getting to try that out, and then being able to answer questions on that and provide some feedback to the team. So it has been a lot of fun. And it has not been, as Emma said, you got to find a balance for your own life, and I've had to find that. So I haven't been able to do much what I was expecting, but I still have found it very rewarding and a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Well,
my input is also I really looked.
On the other side, sorry.
It was really beneficial that to have regularly call with community members. So have a kind of advisory board when we have had some, hard tasks, which was not hard coding tasks, but just figuring out what is the best solution. If we also take, the community eyes into the perspective.
Okay, so thanks everyone. I've just got one last question, which I'll just do. Anyone can jump in on. It's from Warren. He says, what's the new thing in .NET Core that you're all excited to be using or to be using soon from Umbraco? So what's the kind of the game changer about V9?
The web framework. So even that it was available for framework until version 2.1, I guess. The web framework is the game changer. Mm-hmm. It's as Simone said, it's lightweight. It has a small footprint. In general, it should be optimized way more.
For me, it's getting to run on Linux. That's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first level citizens of the CLI, it's the game changer as well, because you don't need to use a Visual Studio anymore. You can use a VS Code, and you can run on. You can have the same developer experience that you have when you do Node or Angular development. Just command line something, and then you create something, and it's just a more modern approach to development than right-click scaffolding and go on.
Yeah. And Emma, from your perspective?
Yeah, kind of following on from that, I think knowing that by moving to .NET Core, we're probably opening up contributions to a whole swathe of people that might not have considered before, because they might have started their career and just never gone into .NET Framework. So it's exciting that Umbraco is going to be a .NET Core CMS, or sorry, .NET CMS. So I feel like I'm kind of proud as a product that we are going to be there and competitive, and it's something like a really important badge, especially when people are looking to compare CMS systems. You're not going to just be dismissed for that reason anymore.
Yeah, bring us up to date. Okay,
yeah.
Thanks very much. We're coming to the end of ours. Just as well, as you probably see, I'm going to be blinded if it goes on for more than another couple of minutes. So we've come to the end of the time. I just need to say the next session is on the 12th of May. It's currently participants and hosts to be announced. So watch this space to see what the topic will be. But I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the interpreters. And I hope this was useful. And goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for running it. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.